Alrighty, at this point, our Vice Chair, Vicki Mandel King, will introduce our speaker.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see so many faces that I've come to recognize over the last few years, and to also see new faces. Happy Mother's Day to all of you for tomorrow and for this weekend. Today's the day to celebrate, is what I hear from the weather reports, though. So it's my pleasure today to be able to introduce Kim Mooney as our speaker. Many of you have been lucky enough to hear her speak for us and for other organizations over many years. Just very briefly, she has been with True Community Care for 21 years. She's been involved in programming for family and grief counseling, and she's the director of True Community Care of Community Education Services. Kim is a keynote speaker, she's a national presenter, she's a published author, she's incredible. From my perspective, for any of you who have not heard her, you're in for a treat. I've actually heard this talk a couple of years ago. Knowing her, she's amplified it, changed it, tweaked it, added to it. But it's more than this talk. It's how Kim is about this topic. It's her passion, her lifelong passion. And she has such a way of saying the D word, talking about death. There's a matter-of-factness that's warm, that's sweet, that's knowledgeable, and she's so good at making all of us feel more comfortable about this really important topic and something that affects us all. She's not only involved with True Care, but she's involved with the conversations on death. She's involved with so many organizations that all are coming together, certainly in Boulder County and other areas, nationwide as well. She knows her stuff, and she's terrific. Please help me welcome Kim.
No pressure there, huh?
No.
You walk on water too, right? It's really scary. This is a picture of me before my makeup in the morning. It's supposed to be on.
We've got a sound issue.
Yeah, we have a sound issue.
Well, don't look at me.
Do you want me to wait?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I have been working with death for 21 years, and what that means basically is that when you go to a party, people get out of your way on your way to the food table, or they stop you and they talk about every single death they've ever had that nobody's wanted to talk about. So I do feel sort of passionate about this. I think doing something like this is really fun because it's different than sitting down with people and saying, let's talk about your death. So the National Geo approach to death education is really good, and it's really easy. And so a couple of things I'll say. First, I'm going to give you a chance to get a joke. And people either get this right away or they don't. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So it's a snowman who's died and melted. And his people are taking him away. And I think it's fun to recognize that we have a lot of different cultures and a lot of different cultures within one society. And one of the things that I think is really important for us to recognize is that when we talk about death traditions around the world, we like to separate out the indigenous people and the traditional death customs from us in the Western world, and we kind of demonize us. We don't do it right. There are very few traditional places left where that's all they do and the only way they look at it, because we have the internet. So everything is sort of globalizing, and we're able to co-opt and borrow things from each other, and it's been pretty amazing. I think that what we do have in common with all death traditions is that they cover a certain number of things. They want to acknowledge that a death has happened. They want people to be able to express it and grieve it in whatever ways are inherent to that culture, and we'll talk some about that. Then they want to find ways to acknowledge, to celebrate the dead, or at least acknowledge they're gone, and separate them from the living. So some of these rituals and traditions are about moving the dead people on, and some places don't want to do that, and some places really want to do it, and then integrating things back into society. And that is really the bottom line in all traditions is, can we go through an intense event and can we get things back to normal? So cultural traditions are around creating safe places for the people in a society to do what they need to do and get back to normal and be productive. So most of the traditions you'll see here involve things like 5 senses. Senses are important because that's how we take in information. 4 directions. Humor is big, community is big, and grief is big. So as we're going through this, what I would like is to have you look at what we look at and think, what parts of these might you want? Now some of them you will go, ooh, no way. But maybe by the end you'll go, well, my family might not like that, but I might like it. The other thing I will say is that what we're seeing more and more globally is that things are getting more public. There are more possibilities of expression for different kinds of people who are very emotional, people who aren't. And then we're getting more public again, which is really nice. More public and more personal. So people are having the desire to express themselves personally. But after years of, quote, death being in the closet, we're actually seeing more people. Is this up now? No. No, okay. We're actually...
He's dead, I think.
Okay. How cute is that? He's the plant. He's the plant now. I think that there is a really important difference as death, quote, starts to come back in. It's fine to be scared of death. And we over here have a lot of good reasons. We've been separated from so long that we don't see it anymore. We don't breathe into it being normal. And that separation, which started at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when we used to have bodies in our parlors. And when they left, they went into what? Funeral parlors. So just the sheer connection to it. So the world gets divided into people who've been around a death and people who haven't. So being scared is fine, because as the Buddhists say, it wakes you up. Being terrified is not. Because being terrified is when you refuse to look at things. So when we look at everything today, we're going to break this down into dying. What does dying mean to you? What is the dying process? In some places, dying process means saying goodbye to your family. Here, it means you are in for medical and legal considerations. You know, you can't pronounce, somebody else pronounces a body dead. It's a very complicated thing. We should be a little afraid of dying here, unless we have done our advanced directives. And there's material on the back table. We do a 6-hour kind of family workshop on advanced directives. Like Ray said, please do not wait for this. Please do not assume that you have a lot of time. So what does dying mean? Because that's going to shape how you feel about dying yourself and having people around you die. What does death mean to you? Some cultures just assume that it's very natural. For some people, it's a punishment. So really looking at the religious pieces within a culture, or a society, the spiritual pieces, and what it means socially when you're all involved in a funeral. In the Dagara tradition in Africa, when somebody dies, everybody comes from miles around, whether you knew that person or not. And they all spend 2 days in a grief ritual, which allows them to kind of keep cleaning themselves out. It's a community piece because community in that subculture is more important than the individual. We're one of the ones that has a little trouble. And then there's always the dead. I think we could change everything in the country if we could walk into every room and say, who's afraid of bones? Because if you're afraid of bones, you're probably not going to want to talk about death. In some cultures, they're just not freaked out by bones. So looking at these 3 pieces, we're kind of going to go through things. And so in America, generally speaking, this is our most common death practice. Ignore it and it will go away. And other countries actually laugh at us because we don't start out conversations by being afraid of it. We start conversations out by being insulted that it's going to happen. It's a far cry. We have this whole piece we have to get over before we're willing to really look at this. So what do? We walk around the edges. We kind of say it, but we don't like the word dead. And we are very sensitive in hospice care. We don't force people to say the word dead, but we try to move them toward that. You know what happens when you don't use the word dead is that you can really confuse people, especially small children. One of my friends said that she really wanted to be up front with her 8-year-old, so she kept saying, Grandpa's body's going to be here, and we're going to take Grandpa's body. And he said, well, what did you do with his head? So it's confusing to people when you use these. I love some of these. German, putting on your wooden pajamas. You know. Now, art, assuming room temperature. People who work around death all the time use a lot of black humor, and it's not meant to be disrespectful. But when you are bombarded constantly with sadness and grief and trauma, you've got to let some steam off. So you'll see that EMTs and people in the hospital sometimes say very funny things that nobody thinks are funny except the people in the hospital. The other thing about euphemisms, as you saw in that first picture of me without my makeup, is that we use our bodies and our language a lot to contain the experience of death. For example, the Aboriginals in New Mexico, in northern Australia, that was a picture of one of them at the very beginning. They don't like to have their dead around. They want them to go. So when somebody dies, they don't say the person's name. They don't say any word that sounds like the person's name because the dead are lonely and they don't want to draw them back. They don't want them around. They sometimes move out of houses. We'll see a couple more things that they do a little bit later on. In Japan, apparently, and I don't speak Japanese, the word for sounds like the word death. So it is avoided in some conversations, and there are no fourth floors in some buildings for the same reason.
Whoa.
So we decorate our bodies to protect ourselves or to invite people in. We use language very specifically. I will say again what Ray said, the single most important thing we can do to each other is talk about it. Even if somebody's uncomfortable, if you own it, if you do little things like this, little spurts, it doesn't have to be serious and intense. Sooner or later, it's such a natural curiosity. They always say people don't want to talk about death. My experience is once you get them started, you can't shut them up. They just have to be safe. Okay? So one of the things that's happening is that we are working with the sacred, but we're also sort of being taken over by the world, the profane, and we're trying to figure out how to do this. Well, so this is a little cemetery that is sitting in a parking lot of a Home Depot.
Oh my gosh.
There was a refusal to get rid of it, and yet at the same time, there was a need to move on, so they just stamped their foot. I saw this all over Ireland. I saw little cemeteries in the middle of golf courses and whatever. So we're struggling in some ways to integrate our need for visibility and our need for respect with the fact that society moves on, and we would like to not see this. This one was interesting to me. This was a grave, 20,000 bodies of unclaimed bodies or people who didn't have anybody else, and they decided to build a freeway. So they dug up all of the bodies, and they had the world's largest cremation. So they put the freeway in, but they made a point of not just burying over it. This is the new Compassion and Choices role model. I swear, I brought him into you today. In this tribe, and in many places in the world where death is not so separated, in that cultural energy, in that societal framework, they believe that you have much more control over your death. So in this particular culture, they believe you can die at will. So how many Compassion and Choices people want to move in with this guy? He's young. It doesn't matter how old you are. It's that at some point you have a premonition that it's your time to go. This man actually, according to the story, believed that someone had cursed him. They'd used sorcery on him and that it was his time to go. And he laid down and he said goodbye to everybody and took a deep breath, and within a day he had died.
Wow.
So he was physically healthy, but he willed himself to die. Now, could you do that over here? You know, maybe one in a gazillion of us. But in a culture and in a society where that's a part of the energy, where that's considered part of what is okay and part of what is kind of, it's the way to do it, this is not that unlikely. This happens in at least a couple of the tribes. And again, what's the difference? I am not romanticizing indigenous people. I like plumbing. I want air conditioning. I like being able to get food. It's not so groovy to live in these places all the time. But they have very, very little buffer between themselves and their experience of death. So they don't have to sit down and wonder, you know. I watched this movie a couple weeks ago, and a man who's a grief counselor said, how sad is it that we are so disconnected from our lives that someone has to tell us when we're dying.
Yeah.
That really affected me. What would it be like if you just knew? Now over here, some people know, but then they have to fight with who's going to say it and how are we going to manage it. But imagine just having the experience of knowing and being able to do it. And frankly, to being able to know it and say goodbye and lay down, I'm going there. Because, remember Little Big Man? Where the old Indian laid there and said, this is a good day to die, and lay down, and he just couldn't die. Hours later, it's raining, and he's up. So, and now this has no business being in here, but this happened 4 days ago. This is a 95-year-old woman in a little province someplace out in the boonies in China. And her neighbor, she lived alone, and her neighbor went in to find her to wake her up, and she was dead. No breath, wouldn't wake up, so they buried her. They didn't bury her. They put her in a coffin for viewing. They went in to get her the day before the death, or before the funeral, a day before, and the coffin was open and she was gone. They went looking for her. She was in the kitchen cooking. And they said, what happened? And she said, well, I woke up. I slept a long time, and I got up and I was hungry, so I started cooking. I love it. There was no screaming through the streets trauma. She just woke up. She said, it took me a long time to get that lid off. And I loved it. 95. Does that look cool for 95?
Yeah.
Okay. So, traditional Greek burials, and again, there are most places they aren't just traditional anymore, but still in a lot of villages, Greek widows wear black, and sometimes they wear black for their whole lives. They adopt the identity of a widow. When someone dies, they spend 5 years tending the graves. And why do they spend 5 years? Because this, as in many other, not many, but some other places, the body is actually put in a grave to decompose by itself. It goes on an individual journey. And then the bones are dug up, and they are washed with rosemary and red wine. Rosemary is the herb of remembrance. And then they are carried to a common ossuary, and their bones live forever with all the bones of their family and their friends.
Wow.
So this is something that happens in other places also, where the bones are left alone until they have gone on their journey. It happens in some indigenous tribes. It's kind of the same way, but not as deliberate. In New Orleans, sometimes it's so hot down there, and they have these above ground, they're kind of like crypts, and you put a body in, and then basically they just cook because it's so hot. And because there wasn't that much land, when the body is completely decomposed, the skeleton's free, they just push it into the middle. And the middle is not mini crypts, it's just a big hole. Big hole. That doesn't sound very groovy, does it? So that the bodies end up being joined at the end. So there's a lot of thought about how you want, how they want to be treated. And each individual person, as we know, has their own journey. I think this is really cool. Who's afraid of bones? Because when they are buried, when these people are buried, the last thing that they do before they put them in the ground is they kiss their forehead. And the first thing they do when they unearth them is they kiss their forehead. So in our faces, that's what we're really looking for, is how can we put the experience of death in our faces in ways that don't scare us to death, so to speak. You know, we talk about this with the graves in Mexico and in other places, that sometimes we are asked to take a big clump of dirt and throw it on the grave. Because even the sound of that dirt hitting a coffin is just another sensory remembrance that this is really true. It's a separation of the living and the dead. This is actually in France, and what happened during the plague, which I don't remember which century it is.
Oh, that was the 14th century.
The 14th century. So there were a lot of people dying. There wasn't any place to put them. So they started putting them in these crypts underneath the churches and underneath town. And sooner or later somebody went, whoa, those skulls kind of look good like that. This is a not elaborate one. Some of them are quite elaborate. Rooms full of skulls. And of course, the good and the bad is that people can come and see this as a tourist attraction. The bad is that every time we've opened a place to a tourist attraction, somebody has messed with bones or just desecrated it a little bit. So I'm not so sure I like that. But my husband always wants to have antler furniture in the house, and I hate it. But if I have a choice between antler and bone, I'm not going with this. One thing that I think is also really interesting is that these are not, see the crossbones, the skull and crossbones? I've always looked at the ways that we have made death scary, like Halloween. That's our only holiday, really, in this country. And what do? We scare the heck out of everybody. You know, it's goblins and ghouls, and It's not like it was when the pagans had it, and it was a celebration of the day when the souls left. That separation between us and the souls. So we make things scary. So the skull and the crossbones first started being used as a signal during the plague. Do not enter this house. There's plague in this house.
Where did they get the skull?
All these skulls are dead people.
Yes, but
they buried them all under there when the plague started, and then they continued it as a habit. You know, it just became kind of the place where people the cool place to go if you're dead. But after the plague, then who adopted it? Who are we the most familiar with looking at skull and crossbones? Pirates. Badass. Don't mess with me. And then it actually came into most vogue because illiterate people could not read bottles of poison. So it signaled again poison. Well, there's 3 really good reasons to fear bones, isn't there? Because that symbol means bad, something bad is happening.
Kim, could I ask, did people in the 14th century make these elaborate displays?
Some of them, the people in the 14th century make these elaborate displays. It started when the bones started collecting, and I believe it's gone on. I don't think there are any current bones in there.
Oh, okay.
But these, I'm telling you, these catacombs are gorgeous in their own way. Yeah, this is not a very intricate one. So where do we go with the bodies? Where do they actually go? They go back to nature some way or other. These are sky burials, and they happen for different reasons: cultural reasons, social reasons, physical reasons. The sky burial up on the left is vultures, and it's part of a Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but they're also, up in Tibet, there's land is precious. They're not going to waste land. There's very little firewood. So they used to just put bodies out to expose them. But because Tibetan Buddhism is so much about taking death on, really living your life knowing that you're going to die, they would put the bodies out, and they actually do some things to make it easier for the vultures to get to them. It's a respect for the circle of life. Now, to us, this is like a little off the wall. But in that tradition, because they're so used to it, and this is part of it, they actually are okay with it. It's part of their practice. They have people in the society who it's their job to put bodies out and make them accessible. And they sing, "Brother Vulture, it's your time." No? Don't try that on the mall. It's really, I have 100 ways to make people run away from you. This is actually a Sioux sky burial, and sometimes they just put bodies up there and let the elements do what they're going to do. They don't necessarily do anything with the body. Now, the Aboriginals, they do this too, but they break the legs of the person that they hang up in the tree because they don't want them to come back and find them. So is that traumatic? It might be to us. It makes perfect sense to them. At least if the dead people are after them, they know they can outrun them. Open air cremations, also not that uncommon around the world. They're a little freaky here. It takes 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 hours sometimes for a body to burn in a cremation. We have 2 places that I know of. One is up in Red Feather Lakes and one is in Crestone, where we are able to do open air cremations, and they're Buddhist sites, but non-Buddhists can actually use them. You have to work through a mortuary. It's another very, very dramatic way. This happens a lot in India, of saying, I mean, imagine the process of knowing that that person isn't in there anymore. But a lot of us would be not happy to all of a sudden walk in on one of these. But when it's done in context, it's quite beautiful. So again, it really depends on where you are, how you hold these. And also here, one of my girlfriends wanted to be cremated, open air cremation on some land. And I called around trying to figure out how to do this. This was 25 years ago. They told me I had to get a burn notice, like if I was burning leaves. So they weren't quite integrated yet. So we also put people in caskets. And again, you can tell that's a Chinese casket. You probably knew. So they reflect some of the design of their culture and some of the design of how they want to be in society. There's still a lot of people who use plain pine boxes. And I had friends a long time ago also that when Tina died, the woman who wanted to be cremated, she was not cremated. We kept her body at the mortuary, but we got a big old cardboard box. And we took it over to the memorial service, and the kids drew on it, and we wrote poems, and we glittered it. And then we took it back, and she was cremated in the mortuary in the box. This one down here is Bulgarian. It is covered with, guess what? Little tiny skulls. know, very different. Some older cultures, a lot less problem with this than we do. So we're still pretty adolescent. Okay, coffin joke. It was so sudden, you were lucky to find a sponsor. But as with everything in life, whoops, it's not necessarily a joke. So in Ghana, it's a big deal to have a coffin handmade for you. And you often sit there and watch them while they're doing it. Handmade, and they're either handmade based on what your job is, or sometimes what your biggest vice is, or how you want to be remembered. So these are some of the coffins from Ghana.
Oh my gosh.
You know, a lion. My father was always so brave. Marlboros? No. A hammer for a carpenter. A camera for a man who had a camera star. And I don't want to know, or maybe I do, who wants to get buried in a pig? Or who wants to be the rat? I mean, it makes you wonder. And someone must have chose this, or perhaps their family chose this after they died. But what an amazing way to say they're dying, they're dying, they're dying, you know. And this actually started because a king he had something done. I can't remember what his shape was, but he decided not to use it. And so they took it back and they kind of said, well, like it looks a little like a rat. Hey, Fred, do you want one that looks like, you know? And it came down from kingdom. These are very traditional ways. Usually when we work with funeral homes over here, they offer very, very nice packages. So it's not just putting a body in the ground. You can put it in a vault, which means that it won't decay naturally. Some places you can turn it over so the vault is actually reversed. It keeps the ground nice and level, which makes it easy to keep the grounds up, but the body can decay from underneath. Some a lot of funeral homes now have these amazing ways, technology, to keep things alive and personal again. So you can have on your gravestone a big VCR screen with a message, so they can push a button and hear and see you again. You know, I always say to people, be careful what you put on there because it's going to be there forever. So there's lots of ways that they tie it in with you personally. There are more and more ecologically sound or friendly ways to leave a body in the ground. This one is wrapped in a shroud. Some bodies are buried in places with no shroud whatsoever. There are actually green burials that can happen in cemeteries, but there are a couple of cemeteries around the country now where they just bury the body, they don't put a gravestone. So you're in a beautiful forest, or you understand that this area looks like woods, nicely, they're not even sculpted, it looks more like you're out in real woods. And you just know that there are bodies buried there. So it's the most ecologically friendly, the most respectful and elegant kind of burials that are going on right now, I think. So lots of ways to bury. Eco-coffins, the coffin on the left, this one, completely ecologically friendly, dissolves in, I don't remember, 5 years or something like that. So you still get the acknowledgement, that sense that a body is going in a box and it's going away from you. But you also know that, once again, that person is going to be on their individual journey at some point. This one is called the cocoon, and it was designed by 2 Italian designers who wanted to get away from regular funeral images. It's made out of resin. It takes about 15 years to decompose. But if we go back to Ghana, what's that look like to you? Does anybody want to be buried in a suppository? Really, this is like cultural stuff across the world. You know, you want to blend it gracefully. But part of this is, again, that reconnection to the planet's needs. You know, there are other ways to dispose of bodies that we don't use over here. There's one, cannot remember the name of it, but basically they flash freeze, don't tell anybody I said that. Flash, I guess it would be an open cremation thing though. Flash freeze your body and then use ultrasound to break it into these little tiny crystals, which actually have some nourishment for plants. Cremains do not have nourishment for plants. So using something like that really contributes back again to the planet. And we see that in other cultures, like in the Chinese culture, burying someone in an ecological coffin is not just a matter of following the philosophy of integrating people and the planet, but it's considered a sign of respect to do something like that for the person who died. So you're giving them a final gift. Okay, I say eco-coffin because this is not ashes. This is actually a coffin about this big, and you are put back in the fetal position and buried in the ground. And then over each one, again, made by designers, they plant a tree outside of it so that they intend to have these groves. So that when you're walking through these beautiful groves of tree, you know that these coffins that look like seeds, so again, it follows that theme, are underneath. So that'll look really different in 20 years. And finally, has anybody heard of this? We put ashes wherever we want, and it's fabulous. There are actually ashes probably every place you go. I know we're not supposed to spread ashes. If you call Boulder County and say, can I have an ash spreading over by the creek, they will likely say no. And one of the reasons for that, at least what they told us with Tina, is that if there's ever a crime committed and they find little pieces of bone, or even if there isn't, they don't know what that bone is. So they want to know where are ashes spread, where are bones buried. You can bury in your own backyard, and there actually, is anybody here involved in natural transitions? So you know, you can do it. You have to get permission, again, to make sure that the authorities know where anything that looks remotely like a dead body could be. But what happens with Eternal Reefs and a number of companies is that the family actually sits down together and they put ashes in this concrete mixer, and then they build together this concrete piece, which then is lowered into the ocean. Sometimes they have handprints on them, sometimes they have writing. It's lowered into the ocean, and it becomes part of a natural reef. So the fish benefit from it, coral benefits from it. At some point, you won't even be able to see the concrete anymore. And the family is given a certificate saying exactly what latitude and longitude that is at. Now, one of the things that we find is important is that when people have a cremation, they don't have a place like a graveyard to go when they want to visit, or just even sometimes unconsciously to know where someone is resting. So there are a lot of things that are done with cremains like this. Like, I know that my mother's ashes are there. Sometimes I've seen beautiful rocks that go into the garden, and just symbolically that's where that person's spirit rests. And that fits with what I'm saying about the personal and the portable and the temporary, because you can take that wherever you go. I didn't realize this. I finally went back to Chicago to find my grandfather's grave a couple of years ago, and he is buried in this gorgeous Catholic cemetery. Every single one of them has the angels and the curlicues, and it looks like a bunch of beautiful crypts. All the gangsters are buried there. I didn't know this. So there's this Italian part with, I think Al Capone and all the gangsters, and then there's our family plot. And I looked at our family, I guess they're called section, and there's an empty grave in there that will never be used because my grandmother ended up being cremated, and we scattered her, and they can't sell a grave because this person would be in the middle of my family.
Right.
So unless one of us decides we want to use it, in perpetuum, there is an empty grave in this place in Chicago. So we've thought about putting some ashes there just for the heck of it. So what do we do to get people there? Boy, I'm going to be done with this sooner than I thought. We have remembrance services, and again, around the world, they are very, very different. The Toraja, who we'll talk about in a little while, they have a 30-day basically funeral. They have 30 days. And during some of that time, people come and do chanting, and they get themselves into these trance-like states. They dance for days. They take a long time making food. They sacrifice, buffalo and animals, and it's expected that they will be together for 30 days. This is the video I saw, they were burying their, watching, it was the last king of the Toraja before the government took over. And he was one of those old men who said, time is up, love ya, paid you back the money, sorry about what I did in 3rd grade, and laid down and died. So this is, the ceremonies around the world, sometimes the same as the Dagara, are built around creating a sense in the community that something has happened, and a very strong sense that we will all be there. It's not just you and your family, we will all be there. what we call the jazz funerals in New Orleans. Has anybody ever heard of these? On the way to the cemetery, they move very slowly and they play dirge music. So it's very sad. It's designed for us to recognize and feel bad that the person has died. They bury the person, and then they start playing on the way back. And they start kicking out, and they play happy music, and they really get rowdy, and people start coming from around that don't know them, and it's fine to join anybody's band. And it's another way, again, where you can join. You don't have to have had a personal connection. But that recognition that there is sadness, that the deed is done, that the person has been separated, and then to come back into that society. And in this culture down there, that is coming back into that society. It's about joy and movement and music. It's not subtle. This is not subtle at all. This represents more of the kind of services that we're used to. And we are so used to them that we don't break out the components in our remembrance services. And they really are the same. We give people a chance to recognize. We hear stories about the person. If we're lucky. Some services, they don't let you, and I think that they're horrible. We call that dead ritual. That's not fun. Live ritual is when it works. Dead ritual is when it doesn't. So in most of all of our services, we have an officiant. We have a chance to do whatever is important to us, whether it's pray, bring ourselves into some kind of sacred space, tell stories about the person, acknowledge the death, and then the person is buried and we get to move on. This is our most acceptable form. We're doing it in community. It's okay to be sad in community. It's one of the only times. I cry out loud in movies because I think I need to as a model. But people are not okay with it. You can cry at a funeral, but don't cry, even if it's something like Old Yeller. Do not cry. Now, I'll tell you a secret about this, and if you tell anybody, I will hunt you down. This picture, I had to do a YouTube video on death about 5 years ago, and I only had 4 days to get ready. So I'm looking around and trying to find pictures that aren't copyrighted, and I used this picture as a perfect example of how people are at open funerals. It's from my wedding. And it wasn't that bad a wedding. My marriage is good.
Yeah, the clothes are too bright, aren't they?
The clothes are too bright. Well, that's another thing. We used to all wear black when we went to services, didn't we? And we don't anymore. But you still should be dressed respectfully, yeah.
Last month there, we talked about funerals in New Orleans. There was somebody that was really popular there. So when she died, she wanted to be at her own funeral. So they had her on the stage, propped up, dressed up, put her cigarette and stuff, and it was a party, a cocktail party. It was on the news. Everybody thought it was terrible, but I thought it was funny.
No, it's cool. You're going to see a couple like that. I love the idea.
Wow.
Now again, this stuff is usually put together by a mortuary for us. You know, we get help with it. My grandfather, the one who's in the beautiful cemetery, grew up in Chicago in the 30s, much less regulated, and they had buddies. They were all Irish, they were mixed, they drank together, probably more than they should have. And they made one of their friends a promise. And the night after the service, they had the Irish wake, and everybody went home except these 3 guys, and they picked him up and they took him to the bar. They sat on his favorite bar stool and they bought him a drink.
Wow!
Couldn't get away with that today.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so that is to me, that's when we smile and laugh. Let's see where we're at. Here he is. Perfect, you're a good foil. James Henry Smith. His whole life was about, and his friends and he said, joy and tears at the same time. So when he died, the funeral home helped him set up. This was his viewing.
Wow.
Just like you're talking about. Wow. So he was a Steelers fan. You know how some people are just rabid football fans? He was rabid. So they laid him out in his recliner, remote control in his hand, cigarettes and beer right next to him, Steelers blanket on, and they looped his favorite game over and over. People came in for 2 days and said goodbye. I love it. I love it. Because even just seeing his body is a huge deal to people. So to take the edge off of it and to be able to see it in his favorite place. Now this isn't the same as when we try to, and I'm just going to say this for me, I think embalming is not great. But for some people, it's really important that when they see their loved one, that they see them not looking dead. And it's fine. Everybody, even in one society, we come from very different personal backgrounds, family backgrounds, trauma backgrounds, all of this. So we want to be very respectful. And thank God over here, we have all the choices in the world. In some places, they want to bury people right away because it's tropical and it's 95 and it's a health risk. We can do anything we want over here. So we're very, very lucky in that respect. I was going to say something really funny and I can't remember what it was. What was I talking about right before that?
Embalming.
Embalming, yes. But I can't remember what it was.
Look at his pants.
Yeah, he probably his pajamas. I know. Totally natural. So embalming. Do you know when it started was the Civil War?
Yeah.
When they were trying to get all these bodies back. And now it's become an option depending on what you want to do. I mean, I know some of the Buddhist traditions, they don't embalm, but they let people see the body. How much in your face can you take? And what is the benefit of it? Like for some people who are used to death and dying all the time, they don't they don't mind seeing a dead body. For some of us, it's still pretty freaky. So seeing a body that's kind of cleaned up is okay. I think for a lot of people though, when they see a body and they don't even look like they're dead, it's confusing to our brains. So to me, the more natural we can create that line, even if it feels a little harsh at first. And the nice part about being in community is one person going in there might have choked. But when you go in with everybody and somebody goes, oh my God, I can remember when you watched that game. Everything is more soothed out. So very personal and in ways that are short. So we're looking now at some of the interim measures. Before the body is completely put away, what do we do to make that transition? We do these kind of things. This is in Chile, and Elias died a year ago. And so there they believe that the death isn't the end of the person, that it takes a year really. They have to kind of relax and let the guy go. And the part of the feeling about this, and this happens over here too, you'll see some traditions, like in the Jewish tradition they don't put the gravestone down until a year later, is that it gives you time to really understand not only the death, but the impact of that person on your life. Because we do a lot of what's called deifying the dead. Have you ever been to a funeral where they start to say, Uncle Fred was the nicest guy that ever, and you're going, no he wasn't. We deify them, and then maybe 4 months later you go, he kicked the dog. So after a year or so, you have developed a full-blown relationship with that dead person. And you say goodbye very differently. Now there's some of these, again, in tradition, where your relationship with the dead, again, is either very good or very bad. In China, ancestor worship, they expect that they're going to have an ongoing relationship with the dead person, and their rituals reflect that. And they ask advice, and some places they actually, again, they invite the dead back, but only for a little while. So the Mexican tradition, Dia de los Muertos, it's true in a Japanese tradition called Oban. They invite the dead back, they say, please come eat with us, talk with us for 3 days, and at the end, we're going to put you in little boats and you're going home. So that idea that if you have a good relationship with your dead, that you can continue to interact with them in a healthy way, but not be stuck there, is another theme that we see, that ongoing sense of nature. So he's been dead a year, and they brought his body back. It's a small town, a small house, so guess where that body is? Dining room, kitchen, table, same place they eat. We wouldn't like it. They don't mind. Their whole life is integrated. They put them out. They light candles. We light candles all around the world. They use coca leaves. We don't get to use coca leaves in our ceremonies. They bring out a fermented beverage and they party all night. They say goodbye to him and they clear stuff up. And then in the morning, he is buried, his spirit is gone, and they are all released to go back to their lives. A year later. Who's afraid of bones? They're not afraid of bones.
Is he laying on that table?
I can't
Yes.
see a body there.
He is. Well, okay, so there's his shoes,
Yeah.
and there's his clothes, and his head's, you can't really see his head up there.
Right.
But yeah, that's his whole body.
So the body isn't there for a year, though.
It's not on the table for years.
Right.
It's like, move the mashed potatoes. No.
So was that body embalmed?
No, I don't think so, because they don't embalm until it was probably exposed, to the elements someplace. If you leave a body alone, it will naturally desiccate. And in places like I said, in New Orleans, it'll go really fast if it's very hot. There's a period, I was in the Cayman Islands a couple of years ago. It's a very small island. And it's got one road that goes around the edges, right? And the road is maybe 300 feet from the ocean at all times. So you're going through these little towns and they all have a cemetery. A little town all have a cemetery. And I said to Kevin one day, God, there must be dead fish on that beach because this place smells terrible. And he looked at me and he went, it was the cemetery.
Oh.
That there was actually hot enough that you could smell the bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was yuck. And I was thinking, I hope they don't have any fine restaurants near there. But they were used to living with it. You know, they might not even have liked it, but they were used to living with it. And they kept their cemeteries in the middle of these small towns. They could have moved them inland. So again, the five senses, smelling, sounding, hearing. Now I see lots of noses wrinkling. I'm going to bet nobody wants that particular tradition.
So after a year, is this bones or is this a body?
You know what? I think it's probably bones with desiccated skin over it. They didn't strip it, so it's a desiccated body. Which really is only bad, you know, the first, it's the initial period where the body's starting to release fluids and get rid of that. Desiccated body, they're mummies, basically, you know, and they're not that scary. There actually was a period in time, I think at the beginning of the 20th century, where rich people would have mummies brought in to parties over here, and then they would unwrap them at the party.
Oh my gosh.
Again, not thinking that these were somebody's relatives. A lot of the things that we do these days, as I said, they're personal and they're interim. So we want to know where bodies are going to rest finally, but we see a lot of these, especially around accidents. Princess Diana, do you remember the beautiful flowers and cards and everything that were there? This was a young girl who died on a road in Hawaii, and sometimes these memorials are up for a very long time, and sometimes they're only up for a couple of weeks. You know, when they're balloons and things like that. But they're in our face for just a little while. They don't have to be personal, but they are reminders. You know, when I see crosses on the side of the road, I appreciate them, and I can stop because I do this. I can always stop and think, that's somebody's relative under there, and there's a story behind that. So I stop and I take a deep breath and just pray in my own way that everybody's okay now. So we do have a number of those around the country, but usually when they're elaborately done like this, they're done for an event and then they go away. We don't leave these out very often. Okay, where do bodies go for short or long periods of time? Does anybody, well, y'all know Star Trek, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Majel and Gene Roddenberry are orbiting. Their ashes are orbiting.
Oh my God.
So is Scotty from Star Trek,
Oh.
and a couple of astronauts, and one guy who discovered a planet. But a lot of other people are orbiting. You can get some of your ashes into orbit in an orbit that will last for about 500 years. You can get them into an orbit, and of course the price is different on all of these. That will last for about 6 months, and then you will come down and become a shooting star. So how nice is that? You can also, if you're really cheap, you can just go up and have them ride around the capsule and come back down. So they can have had a space ride, and then they get buried. So in the ocean, up there, lots of ways to do it, some kind of temporary, like this can be very temporary, as people get a chance to give their loved one last joyride. Some of the differences in the way we bury people around the world are also very specific. We don't have AIDS graveyards. We don't have graveyards that are focused on a specific loss. But in Japan, and this also started in the 1600s, they have graves and shrines that are just for babies, miscarriages, abortions, stillborns. And the red is a lucky color, and that's all that's in this graveyard. They're usually in temple yards. And they do this for 3 specific reasons. One is to help the parents grieve. And the second one is to soothe the spirit of the lost baby. And the third one is to placate any vengeful babies. Because when this began in the 1600s, there was a famine. And babies were either aborted or infanticide. They would kill the smaller babies so there was enough food for the rest of the village. And the terrible grief, but also the fear that these spirits might come back and not be happy. So that, I think those are beautiful around walking through one. I've had one friend who went there and she said it was just like being in a church, you know, with all the stories. There, I'm back to the Taraja. I love these guys. So their rituals are fabulous. And what they do is, after someone dies, the mountainside is all carved out. They bury the body, but they also create an effigy of that person. And they put a lot of energy into making sure that it looks like that person. And then in ceremony, they bring them up. It's really hard to imagine how they even get them up there. They bring them up and they place them in these cubbies so that they can always look down and bless their ancestors or their descendants. So Grandpa's always up there looking at you.
Wow.
Where is
Cool. Raja.
I knew it until you asked me. I hate it when people. It's over in the South Pacific someplace.
Oh, okay.
I think it's Indonesia. I think it's Indonesia.
Boy, that is.
It's amazing, isn't it? So you look up again, and all of your ancestors are together.
Wow.
So once again, there's that individual journey, and then there's that sense of community with your dead around you. And once again, since they opened this to tourists, we've actually had some of these that have been stolen.
Oh.
That desecration. I saw a horrible video about 6 months ago where tourists are now coming up with cameras to watch the vulture deaths in Tibet.
Oh.
So we really need to pay attention and remember every time we run into a death, or if I use a specific picture, that these are people's relatives. This is not a commodity.
What's the
Kim?
scale of this? Are
Kim?
these little tiny?
They're about this big.
What are those wooden covered?
They could be restrooms for all I know. I don't know. I don't know what those doors are. I could find out, but I don't know. And I'm not even sure if you can get into them. And that might be how they actually get them in there.
Oh, yeah.
To actually bring them in, bring them up. I don't know, but good question.
So is this on a cliff or on a side
Yeah.
of a mountain?
They're on cliffs, and so they have to really work to get them up there. And that's also part of the journey. They're helping their loved ones. Every single tradition, practice, ritual that you see, each part of it is very, very specific to some part of that journey. So the journey to get these effigies up there is as significant to them as the journey to put the body in the grave. And it fulfills the same thing. Once they're up there, part of our ancestors are watching us. That's very comforting to people. Cremains, as I said, they're all around us. So this is a card that's full of seeds and cremains. You send it to someone with a lovely message, they bury it, and flowers come up.
Oh,
nice. This is a company called Holy Smoke. And ashes can be actually put into bullets. And then somebody who liked to target practice still gets to go to the range. I know, they're every place though. And Christmas ornaments, you can get ashes put into an hourglass, into a walking stick, into a fishing pole, a golf club, jewelry. They can actually crush it down and make a ring for you. I mean, there are lots and lots of different ways to keep ashes now. And it's actually becoming a lot more acceptable. I mean, 30 years ago, everybody that I talked to got the ashes. They got rid of the ashes, They put them someplace. Or if they were really liberal, they put them on an urn and they sat on the mantelpiece. And that's where they sat. But it's changing. Okay, everybody take a deep breath, because this woman lost a child and they sterilized some of the baby's ashes and she had it tattooed into her back. And this is not uncommon. It's one of the things that people feel the most uncomfortable with. I think it's absolutely fine. In other places in the world, when someone dies, they cut off their finger, or they brand themselves, or they do some kind of mutilation to show the world that their life is different. And she made a beautiful tattoo. And this is another form of memorialization. Again, I said some of these are very personal and public and temporary. You've probably seen these on cars. You get it made on one of those plastic pieces that you can just put up and they stay up by themselves. Leave it on as long as you want. You can put a tribute to the person who died. Drive around, it's portable. You can leave it there as long as you want. It's a public acknowledgement of your loss without being something that you're living with forever, like the tattoo. But they become very popular because we are now mobile, aren't we? We don't live in the places where our parents grew up and the graveyard is there and everything, is in one place. We are very mobile, so a lot of the adaptations have been about mobility. Great, you can't really see this. This is a 22-year-old man who died. His family said, could we please decorate the coffin? They said, sure. This coffin is covered with duct tape. The kid loved to work with his hands. What you can't see very well around the edges is he was also a racer, a car racer. Checkered flags and those little flames that they put on the side of the car. It's a row of little flames. So they were able to completely personalize it for him. Okay, 38-year-old Aaron Jameson, dying of colon cancer. His wife doesn't have the money, because comedians don't make much money, to pay for the funeral or to pay bills. So he sold space on his urn. He sold advertising space. And he filled it up, and she had quite enough money to fill everything up. So at first people were like, what are you talking about? But he was funny about it. He was entertaining about it. At the same time, he was serious. What an amazing idea. Your ad here, I love that. Can you read his t-shirt? It says, "Cancer sucks," in the middle of it. I love this. It says, she inspired, her humor lives on. This is apparently very close to the edge of the driveway, and people have tried to plug the meter. But you see a lot of these, and again, her humor. So she brought her humor. Some people are very poignant, and it's not funny. It's just bringing their lives in. But there is a lot of humor. I really like this one. Well, this sucks. And again, it usually matches the person's life. Anything that's personalized is about bringing that person back into life. I see in other countries a lot of gravestones where they have a picture of the person when they were young and a picture of the person as they were older. So you really get a sense of their whole life. This one is not funny, but this one really touched my heart. This was a gay Vietnamese veteran who wrote, "When I was in the military, they gave me a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving one."
Wow.
Yeah.
I have one. I told you I was really sick.
Yeah, I think that's in New England. I told you I was sick. If you want fun for about a half an hour, just go Google funny gravestones, because there are some pretty funny ones. One guy's wrote his name, he wrote at the top, "Oh, crap." Well, his name was Crap. Okay, so some of the traditions that have come together, a couple of them, that are new in their own way, but families have put them together. Does anybody know Peggy Arnold? She lives up in Longmont, and she's a good friend of mine. And her father, Paul and Sally, you see them in the bicycle riding, when there is a rock on the campus of Oberlin College. It's a big rock. People put all kinds of stuff on it. They'll paint over it, make it free, and then they'll put in a political statement. And then 2 days later, somebody else will paint over it and do something else. Well, this has been part of Peggy's family. So her father painted it when she got married. They painted it in celebration of Paul and Sally's 50th wedding anniversary. And when Sally died, they went in and painted the rock for her. And nobody touched it for a week. It was quite something. So when Paul died, his grandchildren carried on. They found another rock and they painted it for Paul. Again, public, personal, and in some ways temporary. Isn't that great? Okay, my family. This is a picture of my sister's wedding, all Irish people. You know, they say the difference between an Irish wedding and an Irish funeral is just one less Irishman. It looks like my father's flipping everybody off in the back row, but he's not. My grandmother died 3 weeks before my sister's wedding, and she was really wanting to be there. So he held up a little packet of her ashes so she could be in the pictures. And when we threw the party, it's up in California, and we scattered her ashes, he tapped each one of us and he gave us a little packet. So we kept her ashes, and it started this tradition. We're not afraid of having ashes around. You know, we scattered a little bit. 2 people in the family actually put their fingers in it and put a little bit in their mouth, and they didn't tell anybody else that they did it, because that was a little too over the edge. Not for the second generation. So when my mother died, that's my mother in blue, and my mother-in-law died a week later, that's my mother-in-law in the amber. We had talked to them about this, and we said, you know, you guys wanted to travel. Well, is it okay if we keep some of your ashes? And they both said, sure, because by now it's a family tradition. So we call these mom-to-go bottles, and we take them when we travel. And I also gave one of each to all my mother's brothers and sisters, and one sits on Uncle Roger's mantle. And Aunt Ditsy had a wheelchair, so she had it in her little pocket by the side of the wheelchair. And my cousin Ann called me once and said, I hate to tell you this, but Marilyn went through the washer and the dryer. He said, she loved to travel. It's okay. So when Ditsy died, my cousin Ann called me and said, where did you get the little bottles? And they're doing that now. My whole family is sending to each other just little bottles and going through very nice ceremonies releasing the rest of them. But we all have little ashes that we've kept. Last year when my husband and I went scuba diving, my mother and my mother-in-law were scattered 60 feet under amongst beautiful fishes. They would have loved to have been able to do, but even in life they wouldn't have had the nerve. So we're taking them places that they never went before. And some people, this really freaks them out. This is also something that's become very popular. I want to be at my funeral. I want to hear all the nice things nobody will tell me now. So more and more we're finding people doing pre-death funerals. Now sometimes what happens is that the person joins in and says, I just want to have a big party, and they toast them, and the person gets to say goodbye to everybody, and it's a big party. Other times it's much more traditional. So you might have the person go sit quietly in the corner, and everybody does what they're going to do, what they would do is at a funeral, and they just get to listen and watch. They're very, very personalized, but it's another way of kind of saying it's okay to think and talk about being dead. And some of these parties are outrageous. There have been a couple where they brought in a coffin, and the person laid in the coffin, and then had to try not to laugh because people were saying things about them. So again, what is your level of tolerance, Some of this comes out of what we used to think was respectful, and where is our line? And I'm telling you that those lines are being dimmed because the boomers are not so concerned about formality as they are concerned about something really matching who they are. So people have been buried, about the guy who was buried in the Cadillac in Texas. They put him in his Cadillac, they dug a giant hole, and he got buried in his Cadillac. Technology, picking up. This is Eva. She was 25 when she died of cystic fibrosis. She was a face painter and artist, and you can see in the picture on the left, she drew her heart. There are these beautiful ones on her website where she's drawn lungs, and she showed what's going on in her body. She had a blog, people followed it. She blogged a message. She put a message saying goodbye to all of her friends. It was not pretty. She was in bed. She looked sick, not like this. Her parents were on either side of her, and she told friends what her life had meant to her. And again, it was what people could tolerate because they'd followed her, they'd known her. It was a chance to watch a dying person say goodbye. But it was around the world, and her friends still write into her blog. This is not uncommon amongst young people. And in fact, it doesn't have to be young if you're just technologically advanced. You can stream a live funeral around the world if you can't make it. You can participate in Facebook pages, websites with people. You can leave messages for families that you're not any place close to. It's an amazing thing to be able to do that. And we find more people open to it. Why? Because they're just that far away. They can participate, but they don't have to be looking at a body. So my hope is that all of these small things will start us getting closer and closer to being okay with the whole problem, or the whole thing. The name of her foundation, because she did activist work on trying to help people understand the importance of lung transplants, was 65 Roses. She called it 65 Roses because the little kids couldn't pronounce cystic fibrosis. Now, okay, this is an app. Honestly, you can go online and click in Death Clock, and you can download these apps. Only deaf people do this, but then we show them to each other. So you go in and you say, here's my birthday, here's my health, here's my sex, here's my weight, here's my attitude toward life, and it tells you when you're going to die.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Not only does it tell you when you're going to die, but see the numbers up there? That's not my death date. It rolls them. So you're looking 305 seconds, 304 seconds.
Oh my
So every time you turn it on, it rolls down.
Seconds.
So it's kind of fun, but it also is just one of those little reminders. Time is a wasting. I mean, it's going, and it's sort of kind of a nice thing to just remember. I'm not sitting here statically. There were two that I downloaded, and in one of them I had 20 years, 300 days, and whatever, and in the other one I had 9 years, blah, 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 blah. And I looked at him and thought, yeah, I'm downloading the 20-year. Like that was going to make a difference. You know? But there are lots of little things out there, ways to play. And I'm finding that the younger generations are much more comfortable with this. Although traditionally we say teenagers are not okay with death because they think they're invincible. In some reality that's true, but they're getting a lot more exposure that's not grotesque than we did growing up. This is another one I just had to put in there because it's not just humans who go through this. And there's lots of evidence that animals have strong traditions and strong attitudes and strong feelings. Elephants can identify other elephant bones out of piles of different animals, and they will stroke them and hang out and talk to them, but make noises. And I can't remember this guy's name, the conservationist name. I think his name was Lawrence Anthony. And when he came to Africa, one of the first things they said to him is, we want you to get rid of this tribe of rogue elephants. They're causing trouble. And he said, no, I'm going to work with them. And he didn't tame them, but he worked with them. They were later re-released. And when he died, this group of elephants traveled for 3 days to get back to his house. And they hung out for 2 days and then they left. So there is a sense here that there's much more going on than what we know even. And there is some sense of community or recognition in every part of the world. Okay, what do? If you're lucky, you'll die the way you live. And this is a clown funeral, and there is a clown in that coffin. So all of his friends came and made his funeral exactly to match his life. And this is, again, I'm going to keep harping on why we want to have those conversations and do those advance directives now, because if we're lucky, our lives will reflect, and they will be reflected in our end of life, who we are now, rather than there being a cutoff in a medical emergency. So here is my little advertisement. True community care, my hospice, death cafes, as Vicki said, conversations on death. These are all very different and wonderful ways to find just those conversations on death that are like this. They're not frightening, they're interesting. Conversations on death, we all go sit in a cafe and whatever comes out, comes out. Conversations on Death puts on a great conference every year with really fascinating things. I was the first one doing this at their conference. So if you want to know more about what we do and different kind of conversations and discussions, there is a sign-up sheet in the back. And we'll put you on the list and let you know if it ever gets too weird, you can always get off the list. But I think we do a nice job. So this is kind of an introduction where we're just wanting people to laugh a little bit. And I will leave you with one final thought, and then we have a couple minutes. And this is the one I think is the most important for all of us. For all you know, it could be tomorrow.
That's right.
Any questions, any thoughts? Anything you saw in there that you go, wow, I'd like to do that?
Well, I have known some people who were extremely religious and believed in heaven. And it was somebody died, it was an absolute catastrophe. Any thoughts on this? I mean, they figured they're going to a better place.
You know, somebody who was religious who died, whose religion basically told them that they were going to a better place. But I think this is an example of how we are disconnected from what we think. If we can't feel it, it's like that guy said, if we can't tell our own deaths, that a lot of times people think, I find this to be true, that religion's going to be their wild card in their back pocket. They go past jail free. They think, oh, I've had a religious life, I'm in good shape, and they get there and they find out they're really scared because they've been relying on a philosophy, not on their own personal experience. So in some cases, your religion and your spirituality can be a great guidance, and in sometimes I think it just doesn't work. And those people are sometimes the most scared of all because they thought they had the get out of jail free card. Yeah.
What do you make of the fascination of younger people with the living dead and zombies and dressing up like that and so forth?
They don't know any real zombies. And those are Hollywood zombies. And I think that they have made that, just like, in my time it was Dracula. That any kind of supernatural is another way to be thinking about the bigger picture, but these zombies are Hollywood zombies. Believe me, I know zombies and vampires. And I think that every generation finds something that they think they own that kind of goes outside the boundaries. There's also a lot of sexual innuendo in the the dead world, the living dead world. And I think for kids, that's really a draw, to be able to be, feel, talk, ride that edge of sex without actually having to have it about them. I find that to be true. Yeah.
You know, I just wanted to share on that note that when my youngest daughter was, you know, like an early teenager, the kids at that time there was a guy, I don't know if you, a musician called Marilyn Manson, and he's pretty, you know, pretty heavy duty. And these kids all wanted to go to this, and so we had a group of us, the families, the parents, and the kids got together to talk about it. You know, and what came up during that was very powerful, actually, because my nephew's mother had died when he was 9. He was one of these children, and one of the girls had cerebral palsy. But as she's becoming 13 and starting to mature into a woman, it was a problem for her to deal with this. And what they really clearly, those two especially, but they said, you know, we want to relate also to the dark side, and you guys don't. So I just want to share that it was very poignant to me, that I think as they're coming into their teenage years, that's all I can say.
No, it's true, because as I said, we want connection to this.
Yeah.
It's inherent. It's part of our birthright. And we know inside that if we don't do this, we're going to end up at the end of our lives going, oh, what happened? Or how come I'm so scared? So we look for it wherever we can get it. That's brilliant that they organically sought it.
Yeah, they did. They taught us. They didn't go. We still had to say that it's so uncomfortable, this manifestation of
Yeah.
it. We hear you, we
But to
receive
hear
it, and we'll find ways to explore it together. Yeah.
We have time for one more, and that's it. Yeah.
Back a ways, you mentioned an alternative to cremation, which involved deep freezing and something, and I'd like a name for it, how to describe it. I have cremation in my advanced directive, or whatever it's called, and I want to modify that in this way, and I don't know the words.
You know what? If
it.
you give me your name, I will look it down, but I don't think we can do it here yet. That's the problem, is I think it's still in Europe. They flash freeze you and then use ultrasound, and everything kind of cracks like glass. But give me your name and I'll look it up and see where you can go on vacation. Yeah. And hopefully we're going to find more of those, because over here it's not natural. You have to get it regulated and legal.
Does anybody in the audience have a name for that?
Never heard of that.
Thank you very much for letting me know.